WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Boy, our next guest has had some experience. When she was just 5 years old, she moved from the United States to Iran. And back in those days, that was 1976. Did I say that? Iran was not the same as we know it today. You know, that things changed during when there was a revolution. So it was no longer free. She could no longer be the way she had been in the U.S. And everything changed for her, and including, I guess, mandatory religion classes. She's on the phone right now. I'm going to take a shot at pronouncing her name. I probably will get it wrong. Nioucha, Homayoonfar, I'm going to say. She's on the phone. Her book is called Taking Cover, One Girl's Story of Growing Up During the Iranian Revolution. Nioucha, good morning. I hope I'm not totally slaughtering your name. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. And actually, you pronounced my name perfectly.
Oh, my gosh. Well, there's an unusual moment right there. Where are you right now?
I'm actually in Arlington, Virginia.
Oh, are you glad to be there?
I am glad to be here. Yeah. I am. I love it here.
Okay, so you were only 5 years old. Why did your parents move to Iran?
Yeah, I was 5 years old and we lived in Pittsburgh. This was in 1976. And my father, who is Iranian, was getting a lot of calls from his family back home in Iran asking him to return. He'd been living abroad for more than 13 years at that point, and they really missed him. And they kept telling him how great Iran was and the economy was booming and that he would do really well finding a job with his Western education. And because my mother, who is French, also had French and English languages, that she would be able to find good jobs in some of the foreign companies and foreign schools that were in Iran. So that's why in 1976 they decided to move us across the world and settle us in Iran. And as you said, you know, things in those years from the 50s, 70s, leading into the 70s was really nice in Iran. The economy was booming. There were a lot of foreign companies and people would travel all around the world from Iran. And so they were able to find good jobs fairly quickly and build us a nice new life. And all of that came to a grinding halt around 1979 when the Iranian Revolution happened. And we went from having a king, a Shah, who was very Western-minded and Western-oriented and trying to modernize the country, to suddenly having a very religious regime set into place.
Oh, my gosh. And were you, well, let me ask you this. Were your parents considering leaving and they couldn't? What was their thoughts? Do you know?
So initially when the revolution happened, nobody thought it would last for as long as it did. Everyone around us was just saying, oh, this is not going to last. These clerics are going to leave. They're not going to survive this. Nobody wants them around. The West will eventually come back in and interfere with the politics and remove these guys and bring someone else into power. And so for a long time, actually, for a few years, that was the mindset that eventually this would change. And then the war happened in 1980 with our neighboring Iraq. And I think what happened was with my dad, he just felt really guilty leaving behind his family, you know, his mother and his siblings. And because we did have a free ticket to leave the country because of my mom, but nobody else did. So he was really just kind of feeling really badly about making that decision. And it wasn't until years later that my Aunt Minu, who's very close to my dad, sat him down and said, listen, you guys can leave. Why are you still here? Just, you have our permission to leave and go.
So when things were at their worst, you were about 10 years old about?
I would say anywhere between 10 and 16 was at the worst, because the revolution by then had really taken roots. The war was raging, and so we had the religious authorities to contend with and the war as well. So really between 10 and 16, things were pretty bad.
So language obviously was an issue for you. Were you pretty good at picking up on the language?
Kids are so good at picking up languages.
Yeah.
And I was very young. I was 5.5, so I had picked it up really quickly because I was hanging out with my older cousins, and we were watching TV together, and I would also go out with our friends. But I was trying to hide it from my family, my parents in particular, because I was secretly hoping that if I wasn't learning Persian, the language, that they would decide to move us back to Pittsburgh, which is
Oh, that's kind of funny. So tell me about the religious part of the changes that were implemented. Did it affect you? And maybe another question, if I could ask it two in one. How did it affect your mom? Because everything we heard was that the women were the ones who really took the brunt of all that.
You're absolutely right. So we had to, about a year after the revolution, have to start wearing a robe that was a very loose-fitting robe, so nothing, tight-fitting, including pants as well. We couldn't wear leggings or tights or socks to come out in the streets. And then we also had to wear a scarf so far down our forehead that only the oval of our face could be seen.
And
so when I was in 5th grade, I started having to go out dressed like that. Now, mind you, I was 10 years old when this was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really just ridiculous. But my mom, being French, had a very hard time with it and just was very outraged that, first of all, her little girl had to go out dressed like that, and she just kept commenting about how ridiculous this was. But she also really just took personal offense to it, and she would often, go out and just make all these comments about how much she hates having to wear her scarf, and the scarf is always slipping off of her head. Now, mind you, the Iranians themselves loved my mom. They loved seeing her out in public because she had blonde hair and blue eyes, and nothing she could do could mask the fact that she was not Iranian, even after she wore the scarf and dark glasses, because as soon as she would speak Persian, it was with such a heavy accent. And they all loved and adored her, everyone, except for the authorities. They would just kind of sometimes zero in on her appearance and try to give her a hard time about it. What would happen was one time that it did happen, because we were actually in a car accident one time, and in the commotion of things, my mom's scarf completely slipped off of her head. And it just so happened that there was a religious police right there, and he zoomed in on my mom and just got closer and started shouting at her, fix your scarf, put your scarf back on. And this mob of people surrounded her in her defense and started shouting back at that police officer, saying, what, leave her alone. Don't you see that she's been in an accident and she's shocked and upset? Just go away. And the mob became so fierce that police officer just got really scared and actually hightailed it out of there.
Oh my gosh, that's a movie scene right there.
And you were pretty mature for your age. At 12, you were questioning your religion teacher.
Yes, I was, maybe mischievous would be another word for it as well. I don't know where that grain came from, but I just had such a hard time believing what they were trying to feed us with the brainwashing and everything. And especially the image of they were trying to tell us that if you don't wear your scarf properly, and if a man who is not somehow related to you by blood, be it, your father or your cousin or your brother or your uncle, if a man who's not related to you sees even a strand of your hair coming out of your scarf, you will hang from that hair in hell's fires for eternity. And
holy cow!
Right? I mean, I just had this image of myself hanging from this one hair, and it just seemed so ridiculous to me, and I just couldn't help voicing my opinions and my questions to them sometimes. And they just, my religion teachers oftentimes really disliked having me in class. And so eventually when I was...
You Pittsburgh girl, you know how the Pittsburgh girls are.
Well, your book is pretty amazing. And you've got, each of your chapters are in English, and then they're in, what language is that?
It's Persian.
Persian, okay.
Yes.
Excellent. So you're teaching me a lot while I'm reading this book.
Good luck with that.
I know, it's very fascinating.
It's published by National Geographic, is that right?
Yes, it's published by National Geographic. They have a series of books that are geared for young adults to expose them to various cultures around the world. And so this was a perfect match because I'd written about Iran, and they wanted to have a book for that young audience about that country.
The one thing I've often said is that when one of the things that is good about social media, assuming that these countries allow social media, is that the young people who are communicating with each other from the countries that maybe politically we don't get along with, but the kids themselves, they realize that in those borders are real people just like themselves who just want to live, and all this political stuff and this religious back and forth, it's really not the real world. It's not what the kids are being, well, they're being affected by it for sure, but that's not the real core of who they are. Thank you for writing this. I think it makes a big impact on all of us that have a hard time understanding sometimes what you might have gone through.
Oh, thank you so much, Larry and Robin. It was great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
The book is called Taking Cover. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a different way we can get it? I know NationalGeographic.com has it also, right?
Yes, and Barnes & Noble has it as well.
Oh, good. Thank you. Nioucha, thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back.
Friends, countrymen, tourists, and Ocalans, lend me your ears. Hey, speaking of ears, there is an opportunity for you to help feed and provide good maintenance